The varied sensory needs of neurodivergent people impact a wide range of life activities. From unique processing needs for the 5 senses we were all taught in elementary school, to the newer and wider understanding we have of the proprioceptive, vestibular, and interoceptive sensory systems, having an awareness of how these systems impact our daily lives can make a big difference in everything from emotional regulation to motivation to communication. This Perspectives episode brings the insights from 3 of our guests together. A quick note, we're going to be opening up the registration for the Neurodiversity University Educator Hub in January. So if you're a teacher and you missed registering when we opened it last time, keep an eye out for that to open soon. If you want to make sure that you don't miss it, we have a link in the show notes for you to sign up for notifications for when it opens. Our first segment today on this Perspectives episode features Carrie Wilmot. Carrie is an occupational therapist, and she shares about the need for us to understand and support the sensory processing needs of neurodivergent kids and teens. Doing an episode that focused specifically on occupational therapy has been on our to-do list for quite a while, and in many ways, it's kind of hard for me to believe that it's taken us this long to get there. So I'm a mental health counselor, so I frequently collaborate with occupational therapists to support my clients, but I also know that there are a lot of people out there who are really kind of just unfamiliar with the type of work that OTs do. So to start off our conversation, can you give us a brief description of what an occupational therapist is and how they support their patients?
Yeah, so occupational therapists are trained to teach people activities of daily living. And so there are different specialties within occupational therapy. People might have expertise working with adults, and they might work in a nursing home. They might work with kids. They might work in a school system. Really what we're looking at as we're looking at activities of daily living, it's the skills that you need to live. So it might be tying your shoelaces, getting up and putting on all of your clothes, having the strength and the coordination and the balance and your muscles to be able to perform all those motor actions. And for kids that are in the school district, that might be developing the grasp patterns that they need to hold their pencils, to cut with their scissors, to understand when they're holding their pencil, letter formation, and the way that line needs to move in order to make those letters. So as a profession, we're looking at motor skills, core muscle strength. Do you have good strength in your core to be able to sit upright in a chair? Do you have enough strength in your arms and in your hands to develop the muscles where you need to have the right grasp pattern to hold your scissors, to hold your pencil, to pinch snaps, to move your fingers together at the same time, to follow a sequence, to tie your shoelaces. And so that's really how it relates mainly to kids. We also have this unique ability to understand self-regulation and sensory processing skills and how that can impact your motor skills.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about sensory processing and how that impacts it, because I think that's often how a lot of people maybe even find themselves seeking OT services, is that their child is struggling with sensory processing difficulties.
As occupational therapists, we look at the traditional 5 senses: sight, taste, touch, sound, and smell. But then we add a few different ones. And this is where it gets a little tricky because people don't really understand. We're actually going to add 3 additional unknown senses to most people. One of them is called proprioception, and that is having an awareness of your muscles and joints and how to move them through space. So a term that we also include with proprioception is something like body awareness. So it's being aware of things that are going on around you and knowing how to navigate space, just having a good sense of self. So like a trick for that would be is if I closed my eyes, I can describe to you that my feet are actually crossed underneath the chair while I talk to you, right? So without looking and using my vision, I know that my body is in that position. Another sense that we're going to add is the vestibular sense, and that is your sense of movement and balance, and it's in your inner ear. And that's where your coordination comes from, how you're able to perform different actions and have good balance. You know, are you able to stand on one foot? Are you also able to control your speed at which you're performing motor actions. Like, I guess the best example I could give of something for the vestibular sense would be like a gymnast, right? They're hanging from monkey bars, they're spinning around, they're moving quickly while they're performing coordinated actions. They have good balance and a good sense of vestibular sense. And then the last one that we're going to add, and this is kind of even like, I didn't even learn about this one in school. So this one is even, I would say within the last couple of years, the newest, is called interoception. And that sort of takes proprioception to another level. And it's at like a cellular level, like inside your gut, inside your organs, having a sense of, do you feel hungry? Do you have that connection between what's going on inside your body at a organ level and how it impacts you in a daily basis? Do you have the feeling you need to say, I got to go to the bathroom? And how does all that pull together? So here's the tricky part. We need all of those things to work together in harmony to sort of like, be able to get through the day. And there are certain types of disabilities and diagnoses that you're more challenged to have those kinds of skills. So therefore, if you're predisposed to having some coordination difficulties, then, the system is going to sort of start to get out of whack a little bit. And then we have to figure out if there's a traffic cop inside your brain, all that information is coming inside to you. What information do I pay attention to? What information do I respond to? And for kids that are struggling with sensory processing difficulties, they don't necessarily have what we would call, I guess, a typical response, right? They might hear a sound. Maybe it's just like a buzzing in the other room, and they might run because they don't know what that sound is. So they're misinterpreting information through their sensory system. And then it's leading to these responses that kind of makes everybody go like, why did they do that? Like, why, why are they freaking out when they see a funny looking texture? Like, why are they not wanting to get wet in the bath? And so why are they struggling with transitions from one activity to another? Why are we having these explosive tantrums that we sort of didn't really know where they came from? So I guess we have this idea of knowing how to look at all these individual systems and think about terms like self-regulation and come up with a plan to say, hey, like, how do we keep that brain in check so that every system is happy so we can actually do those activities of daily living and perform those skills the way our teachers want us to perform them in a way that is, accurate and on demand so that we can survive in the world as it is today.
Yeah.
So it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And I think also you mentioned self-regulation, especially related to, say, for example, emotional regulation, but I think that also kind of falls along with executive functioning skills.
Exactly.
There are a lot of those pieces that all go together. So an occupational therapist can also help with those pieces beyond just the motor coordination stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, because I think we have I guess that's kind of the cool part is that we sort of see things at a different level, right? Like you get some disciplines that are focused on, and not that like speech therapists and physical therapists don't have this understanding of self-regulation too, because over time, I think almost every discipline, you have to learn it.
Right.
Because then you start to realize that I'm going to be the most effective therapist and I'm going to be the most effective parent if I figure out how all that stuff works. And then, you know what? It makes so much more sense because the way I'm asking kids to do things, the way I'm giving them directions, the way I'm showing them what I want them to do, the way I'm preparing them for that transition, it sort of checks all the boxes. Mm-hmm. And then you realize like, wow, they're making progress. They're learning all these skills because we're looking to see like, is their mental state in the right frame of mind to start before we give them hard things? And if it's not, let's not give them the hard thing yet. Mm-hmm. Let's prepare them mentally and in a way that will help them be at their best so that they can learn and focus on the learning that's going to happen or the skill that we want them to perform right after.
As a mental health counselor, specifically working with neurodivergent clients, I do find that I've pulled a lot from I'm not a speech language pathologist, but I've pulled a lot to understand how pragmatic language skills impact emotional regulation and because if you can't communicate with somebody and you don't understand how to use those pragmatic language problem solving skills, that's going to cause you to feel emotionally dysregulated. If you're experiencing this sensory discomfort or you're unaware of those internal body signals that are giving you the signs of that emotional dysregulation that's maybe on the horizon, that's going to be much more difficult for you to then be proactive about handling that or self-advocating for it. There is just a lot of overlap. And I think that as clinicians, as therapists, as educators, as parents, the more we can take that holistic view, it's going to just be better for kids, because you can't discount how all of those things interact.
Exactly. And I think the important part, Emily, too, is that just because you have poor body awareness right now in this moment doesn't mean that it wouldn't be better tomorrow. Your skills are all dependent on where your sensory state is in that moment. And something that happens today can definitely impact what's going to happen for you tomorrow. And you might not think like, hey, that inadvertent trip to the bouncy trampoline place we took last night randomly at 5:00 was the cause of the tantrum at 8:00 the next morning getting to school, because they got so much sensory input in that trip, or the routine got off and then we ate dinner late, And so I think when we're looking at self-regulation as a modulation disorder, the important piece that people need to understand, that we as OTs understand, is that it can be cumulative, but there are things that you can do to help change it. But this isn't also something that needs to be a forever thing. It's a state of mind in the moment that we can work towards making better over time, once we understand like what specifically does your sensory system need to function. And there's lists, right? We can all go online and we can Google sensory fidgets, because we think, in order to pay attention, everybody needs a sensory fidget. And you're going to find squishy ones, bumpy ones, stretchy ones, slimy ones, icky ones, ooey ones, glittery ones, there's now it's like a whole thing, right? There's hundreds to choose from. And we're going to buy one that looks cool to us and hand it over to a kid or a client. And they're going to be like, nope.
Right.
Or one day they're going to love it. And the next day they're going to be like, nope, And so it's so tricky for people, because it's muddy and it's difficult and it's really hard to sort of figure out sometimes, because it changes. It is not the same. And as kids get better, as kids get older, it can get easier because we can predict things, but that doesn't mean that puberty's not going to hit and we're going to have some hormone changes and things are going to be different.
This next segment is from a conversation with Robert Jason Grant. Dr. Grant is a play therapist, and during our conversation, we dive into the interoceptive sensory system, how it influences emotional regulation and alexithymia, and some myths that we should overcome related to sensory sensitivities. I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about how that interoception really does intersect with emotional regulation, and how we can kind of understand that and support that in kids?
Yeah, it's absolutely probably the least understood. And part of that is because it was sort of the last produced sensory area.
Yeah, it's the newest, quote unquote.
Yeah, so it hasn't necessarily been around as long, but it's so interesting because it is all kind of internal. And I think what happens with emotion regulation or regulation in general, that doesn't necessarily have to be tied to an emotion.
Sure.
What happens is that it's just hard for kids to recognize what's happening. It's easy to kind of do experiments with this with people who have no sensory needs, because you can go, okay, I want you just to kind of, what feeling are you feeling right now? Scan your body, yourself. Are you feeling kind of happy, a little melancholy? Are you excited? Do you feel peaceful? And, most of them will come up with something and then ask, how do you know you're feeling that? And then they're kind of like, I just know.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how you know. It's your sensory system.
Right.
Now imagine if you couldn't feel anything. This is what happens for a lot of kids who have issues with that particular sensory area. Like there just may not be anything that's really coming up there. And to keep coming at them with,
how are you feeling?
Answer this, express it. These folks probably have good intentions. They're working off of, how can you not? Because I can so easily. And so it's hard for them to understand what would be sort of the absence of that. And so then it becomes very hard for kids to answer those questions. They can't even answer them for themselves, let alone your question. They can't sit around on their own and, answer for themselves. What feeling do I have? Some neurodivergent kids, some autistic neurodivergent kids actually do better without the sort of traditional language attached to a particular emotion idea. They do better with recognizing different kinds of energy levels, maybe, as related to being able to connect to a feeling, if you will, or that certain states of body existence translate better as an emotion than the traditional, I'm sad right now, or I'm mad, or I'm happy. And that's just one of the things we got to be aware of when we work with neurodivergent kids. It's always about trying to understand the neurotype and the system of the child in front of us, and that awareness that it could be very different from ours in some way. And that's even neurodivergent to neurodivergent.
Right.
That's not just neurotypical to neurodivergent.
Yeah, and that leads to alexithymia, which I think is something, again, that is not very understood. But basically, I feel like those two things are so closely related. And so alexithymia is the difficulty that some individuals have, and not necessarily, I think we see it a lot in autistic individuals, but it's not exclusively there. But the real difficulty or even inability to recognize and identify emotions. And to me, I don't know, it's anecdotal, I guess, but with the clients that I've worked with a lot of times who really struggle with that, quite often, they also seem to have a hyposensitivity to some of that interoceptive awareness. And so if I can't recognize that when I'm upset or nervous, that my stomach gets tight or that my cheeks flush, and I don't have that same sort of sensory input into my brain, it makes it really difficult to recognize what that emotion is or label that emotion. And you mentioned how it's really helpful to sometimes focus on energy levels. I also try to, I think, go at it another way as well, which is to focus on the thoughts. What are the words that you're kind of thinking? Sometimes if they can at least verbalize that, which sometimes they can and sometimes they can't, but that can also help us really figure out, like, what do they need? How can they advocate? What is it that's happening in that moment?
Yeah, it's an important concept for us who work with kids with sensory differences, because you're going to work with kids with interoceptive challenges, and we're so programmed, as mental health professionals with this, just the classic, how are you feeling today? And all kinds of versions of that, even in play therapy, right? That we have to step back and go, okay, wait a minute, this just might not be the avenue of processing for this child. And I can try one of these other things like we've been talking about here today. And that's kind of true for all the sensory areas. As just a pragmatic comment here, like, first of all, believe and understand this is real,
right,
and this is happening to kids. And then second, be willing to understand that this may be why something is happening.
Yeah.
So I need to change the way I'm thinking about what I'm seeing. It's not oppositional because they're not answering my question about a feeling, right? Or they're not trying because they keep having bedwetting issues. He won't eat and he's got to start eating. And I'm so sick of telling him to eat. Well, maybe he doesn't recognize when he's hungry.
Right.
Why is he flopping all over the place? Sit still. Why don't you sit still? Just stop and go, hey, I know that this is real and exists. And so this could be what is happening here. And I need to be open to understanding that and exploring it instead of mislabeling what I'm seeing in front of me.
Right. Are there any common beliefs about sensory processing sensitivities that you feel like should be dispelled? Any myths or just things that people misunderstand about it?
Big myth number one is that it's not real.
Yeah.
That has gotten better, but I still run up against that every once in a while. Like, it's not real. There's no support for it, etc. And that's a big myth. Two, someone can have sensory processing disorder, if you will, or sensory differences as sort of a standalone issue. Absolutely, they can. It certainly can be a part and often is of other maybe diagnosis or other neurodivergence, but it certainly can present as its own individual type of neurodivergence.
Yeah.
I think another myth too is, oh, everybody has sensory sensitivities. No, actually, some people don't. First of all, they don't have any. Again, they just kind of take everything in and experience everything just very smoothly. And secondly, just because every once in a while something bothered you doesn't mean you have sensory needs or sensory differences on the same level as someone who has SPD or really has sensory challenges with their system.
I think the other one that comes to mind as you're just sharing those is also that through exposure, it'll go away.
Right.
Now, I do know that OTs, and I'm not an OT, but an occupational therapist, like there are some techniques that you can use to reduce some sensitivity to certain types of sensory input. Like, I mean, I know that that's what they do.
Right.
But I think also the idea that if loud noises are really dysregulating, but if they're just in these loud environments quite frequently or something, then somehow their brain is going to not be as responsive or something.
Right.
That's just not how the brain works with that sort of stuff.
That is probably an important myth to share.
Yeah.
And let me go back a little bit. I firmly believe, this is certainly true for me, and I believe this is true across the board. It starts with awareness and empowerment of your system. I know this now about me. This is how my system works. And that knowledge being presented in an affirming, empowering way, not a, you got this problem, you need to fix it way. So first of all, I understand me. I understand what's going on with me. I understand my system is key, and that knowledge coming in an affirming way. Then I'm all for tips, tricks, techniques, interventions. I use some today, right? Nothing wrong with that. If you find something that helps you navigate a sensory situation. But the tips and techniques really come after the awareness and the affirmation of this is who I am.
Yeah.
Then they can be great. They can be, very helpful. And just like you said, it doesn't just go away. It's never went away from me. If it was going to go away through some play therapy intervention, I wouldn't have it because I've done a lot of those. But I certainly have learned what I need to do to get through that ski lift, right?
Yeah.
And I certainly have learned how to advocate for myself. I certainly have learned how to appreciate my system and not judge it. And I've learned what some of my strengths are, even within my sensory system. And those are certainly things that we can come in and help kids with in play therapy and mental health therapy who have these kinds of needs.
We'll wrap up this Perspectives episode with Kelly Mahler. Kelly is an occupational therapist, and we build on some of the ideas about interoception, like how to support and accommodate those needs. We also reflect on the flip side of hyposensitivity to interoceptive awareness and think about how a hypersensitivity to interoception might impact someone. What are your thoughts about helping people build their interoceptive awareness? It feels like it's something that's so hardwired that gut instinct might be to rely solely on accommodations in the environment. But I'm wondering if there are some ways that people can actually improve that interoceptive sense.
Yeah, accommodations is definitely one of the things that we might offer someone. So, for example, an accommodation, like for maybe an adult that isn't noticing like those sensations of hunger or even thirst or toiling, whatever it is for them, to set a timer on their smartphone, and then it'll just remind them to go to the bathroom or eat or whatever it is. But we always want to work towards building that interoceptive awareness if it's meaningful to that person, because there is so much hope in this space. The research is so clear that interoception is highly changeable. So it's highly changeable towards, the more positive, where you're more connected to your body. But we also do know that interoception can be significantly changed where we might be derailed from our bodies, like through trauma or through different compliance-based behavioral interventions that condition us to not listen to our body. So whenever possible, we want to offer those interoceptive awareness support so that someone can become better acquainted with their body, their own, unique inner world, and understand that so that they can take care of their bodies in a more proactive way.
It's interesting that you mentioned this piece about being conditioned not to listen to our bodies. So I have a professional consultation group that I meet with once a month, and we met yesterday, actually. And that actually came up in our conversation about how schools, it's like you go to the bathroom when your teacher takes you to the bathroom. You get up and move when it's time to get up and move. I mean, we are trained from such a young age not to listen to what our bodies are telling us. And it's no wonder so many of us don't really respond to our feelings, as in our emotions, in ways that are as productive or healthy as they could be, let alone people who process that information differently.
Absolutely. I mean, those IA extremes, like whether you have a muted or an intense inner experience, are not exclusive to neurodivergent people. It is just across the board for many people. And culturally, we are conditioned to ignore our body. Listening to our body is weak. It's not allowed. And even when I think we're getting a little bit better at the messaging on self-care and listen to your body and, kind of body mindfulness and all that stuff. But even when we take time to listen, I think sometimes for people, I hear that those voices creep in, like, will I be considered weak if I ask for a break? Like it's all of these things. So we are undoing like cultural conditioning. But like you said, it starts from such a young age. And even I've had educators talk about how even their own jobs do not allow them to listen to their bodies. They are only allowed to go to the bathroom at 10:55 a.m. when their students are like, out at recess, or you know what I mean? So it's really, really hard that we're just up against an entire system. But like I said, there still is so much hope.
We've talked, I feel like, a lot, and I feel like this is where we often notice a lot of these things, is maybe more with the hyposensitive side of interoception. Is there a converse? Like what might that be like if somebody is hypersensitive to their interoceptive sensations?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this, because I do think it's not something that is as widely talked about as the muted side of things. What we're learning is, first of all, there are a lot of people that have an intense inner experience. They're feeling so much on the inside of their body. And the cool thing about it, which is really interesting to me, and it actually surprised me, is that the interoception-based activities that we're offering are the exact same activities are working for people that have a muted inner experience, but also for those people that have an intense inner experience. And, really what we're trying to do at the core of our work is to help people just start to notice and understand their body sensations. And the reason I think that's working for the intense feelers, and this is what they're sharing, is that we're helping them to be able to spread their attention to their entire body, where they don't get stuck just on one or two signals, which is very a common report we hear. We help them to their inner world becomes more predictable with all this practice of noticing, because, if something's not predictable, you're not understanding what's going on. Many times those sensations become even more heightened because you're just worried about them. Of course, you don't know what's happening in your body. And so when we begin to give that predictability, that understanding around their bodies, working on spreading their attention out, they're having some really awesome outcomes.
Do you think that individuals who experience psychosomatic headaches or stomach aches related to their anxiety, like a lot of times people will say, oh, that you're just imagining it, like you're not really sick, you're fine. But the way I often interpret that is it's that more intense experience. Would you agree with that, or am I off base?
No, I definitely agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know there's a whole lot of people, maybe even some of your listeners, agreeing with you too. There's so much accidental gaslighting in this space. And, someone like going to the doctor and like they're feeling all these symptoms, and maybe the medical provider can't find any like medical reason why they should be having all of these symptoms. But interoception's not taught in medical school. Like they're not, and it doesn't mean that those sensations, that experience is not there. And so they leave those medical appointments having their inner experience, not validated, and they're wondering like, what's wrong with me? Maybe it is in my head, what all these people are are saying about me. But I definitely think a lot of those heightened psychosomatic symptoms can be due to those that intense inner experience.
Do we notice differences in interoception with other types of neurodivergent diagnoses? I mean, we talk a lot about autism. Is there research about where that might also impact individuals?
Yeah, well, there's some literature coming out of the ADHD space saying that a lot of ADHDers experience these IA extremes. And there's a lot of information coming out of the mental health field that almost every single mental health diagnosis that exists has been connected to some form of an interoception extreme, which that's pretty profound findings. In fact, the National Institute of Health in the U.S. has declared interoception as a research domain of priority.
Wow.
And they're actually, this is a fun fact, Emily, I'm so excited about this, but the National Institute of Health is hosting their second annual conference on interoception in November. So, I mean, this is like interoception is gaining a lot of attention. Like, we don't know enough about, like, you know, like, I'm curious, like, you know, are these interoception extremes like leading to the mental health, like anxiety disorders or depression, or is it the depression, the anxiety, whatever it is, leading to the IA extremes? Like, I feel like they're probably like a parallel development together, but we don't know. And I do think some people are born into this world with like genuine interoception differences, and then some people experience their life experience derails their interoceptive world.
The idea of how sensory needs influence our experience is one that has long been ignored, but it is an area that I love to think about. If you would like to hear the full episodes from any of the guests that you heard here, check out the link in the show notes. I'm sure this is a topic that will come up again in the future, so if you are fascinated by how our sensory needs influence our lives, be sure to stay tuned. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance,